It's my pleasure to introduce Rosie Clayton. Many of you will know, a great colleague and friend of ours who leads the work of Rethinking Assessment, and Rosie's going to chair this panel. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Ollie. I hope this is working, let's see. So, great to be with you all. I'm Rosie Clayton, I head up the Rethinking Assessment Coalition. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of kind of global experts who are going to give us that perspective on how other countries globally are starting to think about how they reform their kind of curriculum and assessment systems. And one of our kind of motivations at Rethinking Assessment has always been, let's look outwards, see what's going on elsewhere in the world and what can we learn for how we might want to bring about reform in England. And my colleague Bill Lucas would say in England we're very much in the slow lane when it comes to thinking about reforms to curriculum and assessment, and particularly around sort of inclusion and recognising the breadth of strengths of all young people and helping all young people to thrive. So really looking forward to this conversation. What I might just do is jump straight in. Each panellist is going to give an introduction to their work and what sort of changes they're bringing about or thinking about in their context, and then similar to the last panel we'll have a bit of a discussion and then move into questions from all of you guys. So yeah, we've got a mix of people working kind of internationally but also within the home nations, which is great. I might maybe invite Michael to kick off from an OECD perspective and talk about the work you're doing on education for human flourishing.
Thanks, Rosie. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about the prospects for transforming PISA. 25 years old. Many would say the lodestar of international education. Some would say the millstone around the neck of education systems. I say both, which is perhaps why I'm in the job. But it was put in place to answer the question, how do we know an education system is of high quality? Answer, test its 15-year-olds against common criteria in the foundational literacies. Why is there a case for change? I think because PISA is the symbol of the way it has been in education. And an approach to education that I would call education for jobs. Finding ways to put people into roles in productive economies. And yet here we are losing confidence in our economic model, recognizing that we privilege the cognitive skills over everything else, and that many children here and around the world say, my life lacks meaning. So let me dive into assessment at the OECD and then come out to try to address that set of issues. The OECD has been evolving its view of education. That has always been a rigorous view, and I think admirably so. We ask the question before each assessment, what is it to think like a mathematician, a scientist? We are looking for assessments which put problem solving at their heart. We define the domain. We define what student performance looks like in each domain, the knowledge, the skills, both cognitive and non-cognitive, the attitudes. We define the situations where you can find evidence of performance, including games, simulations, and we define performance scores and indicators. I don't think we want to give anything of that up, but we wanted to add two ideas. One is usefulness in assessment, and the other is integration. Usefulness we take from organizations like those in this room, but recognition of learning, where we are interested in formative assessment for the learner, as opposed to summative system assessment for accountability. That concept has been well articulated, and we would like to find a way to move it into the center of what the OECD does. Integration, really the opportunity to embed assessment in digital learning environments so that, all being well, you can read off the real-time data, and you don't have to insert kids every 2 painful years into a gymnasium and ask them to do what many of them must dread doing. So we've got those ideas in place now, and we're thinking about into what new educational vision do we insert those ideas, because the educational vision surely comes ahead of the assessment piece. And we have developed, to come to the point that Rosie asked me to talk about, a vision which we call education for human flourishing, not education for jobs, which would seek to address three challenges. One, to nurture a much wider range of capabilities, including the creative and the compassionate. Two, to build a generation of young people who can replace the broken models in our world, be they economic, societal, organisational, but it clearly needs to be done. And third, how can we put the meaning back into people's lives? We are working with 7 high-performing countries, Canada, Estonia, Finland, Singapore, Germany, Australia, and the United Kingdom, who have chosen, after some years away from this kind of conversation, to come back in at governmental level. And we work at permanent secretary level in Whitehall and the Whitehall equivalents around the world. So not the ministers, who often are here today and gone tomorrow, not the heads of national statistical agencies, whose primary interest, and one understands that, is the validity of statistics, but the people who arguably have the long-term responsibility for the welfare of the young people in their countries. And we are developing this framework, education for human flourishing, an Aristotelian view of what flourishing is, and education for human flourishing, moral, reason-infused activities of meaning to me, of significance in the world, contemplative, and inspiring awe. And we tried to reconcile that with well-being, because flourishing and well-being are synchronistic but different. And at the heart of it is an orientation and 3 competencies. The orientation to find your purpose in life through learning. That's the point. And the competencies, adaptive problem solving, knowing how to take the things that you've done in the past, the knowledge that you have, and apply it to radically new situations. Ethical reasoning, and what is currently called aesthetic perception, but may become meaning making. I think that's the direction of travel. And then we're thinking hard about what it would be to assess those things, and how far we would need new devices or new methodologies, expert conversations to assess where a child is. So that's what's going on. And the stakes are high because PISA is determinative of where countries go, for better or worse. Why have foundational literacies come to the heart of education over the last 25, 30 years? One of the reasons is the 4-yearly global competition in foundational literacies, which shifts behaviour at governmental level. So PISA is the mechanism, and if we can evolve it in these directions, it will, for better or worse, but I hope for better, shift the way it works around the world. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, the countries that are working on this agenda together are themselves looking to shift the way they do it. And Finland has already said, we'll do it. We will be the first country that reorients education from education for jobs to education for human flourishing. And I think there's a strong prospect that where Finland goes today, others will go tomorrow. So that's the PISA story, Rosie, which I hope will have an influence around the world.
Thank you so much, Michael, and it's so encouraging to hear the breadth of organisations, countries, jurisdictions that are involved in these conversations. I'd like to go from the work that you're doing very specifically now to the work that's happening in Wales and invite Cassy to talk about the review that Qualifications Wales is currently undertaking around 14 to 16 phase.
Thanks, Rosie. So yes, I work for Qualifications Wales, which is the regulator of non-degree qualifications in Wales. That doesn't directly equate to the similar role that Ofqual plays in England, because we fundamentally have a role in shaping the range of qualifications that are available in Wales for young people, particularly those on publicly funded programmes of learning, but of course they are available much wider than that. In Wales, we have a new curriculum for 3 to 16-year-old learners. That was set by the Welsh Government. When, of course, for that to work effectively, when learners hit 14 to 16, the qualifications that they take, around which much of their learning will be shaped, needs to be in line with that curriculum as well. So we knew that as the qualifications body, we had a job to do in making sure that we had qualifications to meet the needs of young people for the next decade at least. In doing that, one of the first questions that people were asking is, will there still be GCSEs? And we could talk forever and a day as to whether there should still be GCSEs, but the feedback from our stakeholders by and large supported the use of GCSEs in 14 to 16 education. We set about a programme of looking how to reform those, and there are some really interesting developments in those subjects, some new subject areas coming through, a social studies GCSE, for example, and also a lot of digital assessment to try to cut down the amount of pen and paper assessment that's going on there. So many of the new GCSEs in Wales will have on-screen assessment. But we also realised that having GCSEs wasn't going to meet the needs across all learners. And I don't just mean that there are some GCSE learners and some other learners. I mean that the GCSEs as a whole would not be the only thing which ought to meet the needs of a broad education at 14 to 16 for all learners. So we then conducted a piece of work, an extensive review, to look at what was needed alongside GCSEs, and we came back with many suggestions and needs, which we would have to listen to if we wanted to make our offer inclusive and coherent, which is in fact one of our guiding principles for qualifications in this area. I'll jump to what where we've come to. So we will have a really clear and simple national qualifications offer for 14 to 16-year-old learners in Wales. There will be GCSEs. Sitting proudly alongside them, there will be VCSEs in a range of occupational areas with similar size, same size as a GCSE, same level as a GCSE, covering that level and level 1 and 2, assessed with more practical assessment to let those learners who flourish with practical skills flourish in those qualifications. There'll be some external assessment, but it will be a minority of the qualification. So GCSEs, VCSEs. We'll also have a skills suite, which will comprise skills for life, skills for work, and a personal project. And we'll have foundation qualifications which will sit beneath GCSEs for learners in each subject who are not ready to take a GCSE, whether they are in special schools or the learners that might otherwise be targeted at grade F or G. We want them to have a more rewarding learning experience which is tailored to their needs, so they'll work on foundation. But just jumping back a moment to the skills suite, which we think is one of the most innovative approaches to having a national qualification. There will be learners will be able to choose from about 27 different skills for life units, and these include everything from practical gardening, home management and maintenance, ethical studies, faith in the community, sustainability, mental health and well-being, arts and crafts and design and expressive arts, and a wide range of things for which learners will be able to choose units that meet their interests, their aptitudes, but also are really important to them in their life moving forward. And they'll be able to combine those units into a range of sizes of skills for life qualifications. They'll also be able to take units in skills for work, things like understanding the jobs market, understanding green jobs, again sustainability, digital technology in the workplace, and a wide range of other skills preparing for their post-16 journey. And they'll be able to combine those into skills for work qualifications. Or, if they take a mix across the two, a skills for life and work qualification. And then there's a personal project available from the lowest level of entry up to level 2, where learners will be able to choose any subject of their choice. Any subject that interests them. It might be something that the school runs in conjunction with another organisation to give project ideas, or it may be chosen entirely independently. The subject matter is up to the learner and or the school, and it'll be assessed at those different levels against the 4 integral skills that are set out in the curriculum for Wales. Creativity and innovation, critical thinking and problem solving, personal effectiveness and planning and organising. So we think there that we've got a really comprehensive range of qualifications that learners will be able to take from 2027. We've got our work cut out to work with awarding bodies, and we've had a lot of interest in developing those qualifications. And we're just really excited about it, and we think it will make a real difference and create a really inclusive, coherent offer where all qualifications that are taken by learners at 14 to 16 are valued side by side against each other, and that we're not just creating that intensely competitive GCSE grading. We still have A star to G in Wales, by the way, for GCSEs. Thank you. Okay, I hope that was clear.
That was great. Thank you so much, Cassy, and it will be fascinating, obviously, once the qualifications do come on stream, to see what sort of blend learners choose in terms of that mixture of the skills suite, the GCSEs, the BCSEs, as time goes on. So thank you for that. Zooming back out again, I'd like to invite Fabi from the International Baccalaureate Organisation to talk about some of the changes to assessment you're exploring. And I know AI has been a big feature of some of the ways you're thinking about the future of assessment within the IB programmes.
Great, thank you, Rosie. I'm Fabrizia Flynn, Head of Assessment Principles and Practice at the International Baccalaureate. So I'm based in Cardiff, Wales, and it's great to be here sharing national and international perspectives. For those of you who don't know the International Baccalaureate, we create holistic programs of education from 3 to 19. We have presence in 160 plus countries, and so our challenge is very much international, and that's sort of what I'm hoping to share with you today. I think perspectives aside, we share a common reality that the world that we're preparing our young people for is changed. Digitization and innovation is affording a lot of innovations in the way that we work, the way that we engage, the relationships that we build. We hear this loud and clear as educationalists, but our young people are hearing it too, and they want to know what their place in the world is and what it's going to look like. I think we're very much at a time when there's little protection for young people from the actions of adults in the world that we live in. What that means is that we have young people exposed to realities that a few years ago or a few decades ago they wouldn't have had access to. We used to have a time when news and geopolitical realities were very much compartmentalized and securely in a place where you go to seek that information. You go there with a rational ability to process that information that you're receiving and to understand what that means for you in your reality. So what that means in terms of a society is that I think we have young people who are more burdened than ever before, and I think with that we have a real duty as educationalists to be serving their explicit needs more explicitly than we've ever done before. So that means really purposeful design, really purposeful educational design, really purposeful assessment. So going back to that idea of the small world, we always talk, people talk about young people having a very small world. I think that small world is getting bigger because they're exposed to more at a younger age. So in terms of what we need to do then, we need to be able to develop educational programs and assessments that sort of give the opportunity to evidence what they've learned in a very purposeful way. That means formatively developing critical thinking skills that they need to make sense of what they're presented with, whether that's knowledge, whether that's an argument, or whether that's just real life ahead of them, the decision that they need to make to go from one step to another. So what does that mean then for us as designers of curricula and assessments specifically? It means that we need to be thinking very carefully about the skills that we choose to develop in our young people, to prioritize them accordingly, to make sure that they're very purposeful. Thinking about what the IB has done, we've embarked on a multi-year project looking at our 16 plus provisions. So that's our level 3 offering, diploma program and career related program. And it's an opportunity to reimagine, rethink, reinvigorate what that program of education looks like. And it's the first time we've been able to do that since the programs were conceived. So what the priority there is to look at future fit skills, removing duplication, making sure it's manageable from a school perspective, a re-emphasis on the importance of diverse perspectives, applying knowledge to the immediate context of a student, making the global local, and how they make the connections between that thinking. It also means, but again, bearing in mind that this needs to be manageable for schools. So schools need to be able to do this sort of manageably. What it also means, I've got a few things that I want to make sure I say to you, so I've got a couple of notes. It means an authentic incorporation of AI, and I think this is a really big topic for us today. The IB and lady at the front here mentioned about AI in IB coursework. The IB were very forthcoming with a response to how can AI be used in the classroom, and ours was a positive one. It was that it can be used. There are scenarios where it can be used very effectively, but it requires a change in mindset. At the IB, we developed the idea of the ethical researcher, so situating the student at the center of thought ownership, explaining to them that their words and ideas are important and that they have a duty for those to be respected. In turn, to get them to think about the words of others and what it means to borrow or to build on the thoughts of other people. So that's something that we challenge you all as classroom teachers as well to nurture, because obviously that change, you are change agents, that comes from the adults in the room. So it's really about nurturing an ethical mindset, and I think academic integrity is key for all of the evolving technologies that we will see, all of the different tools that we'll have, because it's not about penalising, it's about exposing to a student the reality of the tools that they will have in the real world, and making sure that they can see how they can be used ethically and how they can't be used ethically. So it's setting them up for success in that regard. So what else it means for us as assessment developers, it means very purposeful and inclusive design, and that's inclusivity not just in terms of students who have processing difficulties, who have difficulties with numeracy. It means being very aware that in our classrooms, even in the UK, we may have homogeneous classrooms in certain classifications. You may have a common language, but in all of those classrooms, and I challenge you to think sort of around the world in your own classrooms, you have third, fourth, fifth generation cultural influences. You have different value systems. So even if we are thinking from an inclusive perspective, I challenge us to all be thinking even more about it, because I think inclusivity is beyond just the individual need of the student. It's the need that you don't know is there, perhaps, and perhaps that they don't know is there because they've been brought up the way that they've been brought up, and that to them is their normal. Finally then, it means, and I think this is really important as well, because we have to be realistic, I think it's making sure that we're always planning for the inevitability of adversity, whether that's individual or collective. And I think as assessment developers, awarding organisations, we have a duty to make sure that education can be a constant source of hope, because those situations are inevitable, and we have to have mitigations in place to make sure that students can move through those obstacles and those really challenging times in their life with education as their constant. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Brilliant. And I'd finally like to invite Graeme to talk about the work of Education Scotland, and particularly the profiling achievement, which is something we've got a very strong interest in. You're obviously developing a learner profile for Scotland, amongst other things. Pass over to you.
We are, thanks Rosie, and good afternoon everyone. Can you hear me okay with this microphone and my Dundee accent? I'm never sure. We used to say, please visit Dundee, we have a really old boat. Now we have a really old boat and a V&A Design Museum, so please do. There are really lots of reasons to visit. I'll give a wee bit of background as to why Scotland got into the place that we are and what's happening just now. And really that starts with our curriculum framework in Scotland, when we said just about 20 years ago, and we had the conversation as a country, what is the purpose of education? We agreed then that education should be attentive to the totality of the child. And we identified 4 capacities. Education should develop children as individual human beings first, as citizens in school and local and global communities, as contributors within those communities and in the workplace, and as learners with a lifelong love of learning. And that put us into the space of planning learning, yes, in curriculum areas and subjects, but also across the whole life of the school, the ethos of the school and the community, and all of us in this room will know how much learning goes on in our schools, but not within our classrooms. Planning interdisciplinary learning and planning a broader range and richer opportunities for achievements. That youngsters should have those achievements recognised across all 4 capacities, an opportunity to have them captured and celebrated. So that took us into the space of looking at learner profiles and profiling achievements. When we did some work to refresh the narrative of the curriculum in 2019, we discovered that everybody was behind that as a good idea. The idea was good. We needed to do more work on how we actually did it. That was late 2019. We all know what happened next, so it didn't get going straight away. But for 2 years now, we've had a national co-design group. We put a note out to all, we have 32 education authorities in Scotland. We put a note out to 32 authorities saying, do you have somebody in a school, perhaps leading work in an ELC, early learning and childcare centre, or a primary or a secondary school, or looking at this work across the authority, who is kind of a respected leader of this work and would want to be part of a national community of practice. I thought we'd get about 12 people. We got 90 folk coming forward wanting to be part of that work. And we call that a co-design group because in our small team looking at curriculum innovation nationally, we're really aligned to principles of service design. And we know that if you get groups of educators together to churn through and work through the policy, you'll get better policy and you get better enactment. So that group has explored and come back to the purposes around why do we have profiles and their role in supporting learners to develop and enact agency in their learning, but also the role the opportunities that they offer the school and the educational setting. That group has done a power of work, shared its work in a thought paper that's been shared with ministers nationally, and it's now kind of really doing 2 things. So we are developing a digital approach. We kind of said there's 2 bits of work come out. School setting, but the lack of a national digital place, a national profile where this could be captured and gathered, somewhere to store achievements, somewhere to capture something from the kind of really rich learning conversations that were happening. This national digital thing was a critical enabler that had been missing. So our group are steering and shaping that national approach and that national digital system. But that group is also now a national community of practice that is supporting people, got a real kind of place to support each other. Some examples, early years, we made a point of making sure that our early years colleagues were involved, because when we think about where the skills are, which part of our workforce has the skills in observation, in capturing huge moments of personal growth or achievement or development or progression in some of the skills we've been talking about, our early years educators are the people who are really skilled at doing that and doing that in lots of different creative ways. In primary schools, people are exploring what happens if you move away from a model where teachers spend hours on their own laptops in the evening, writing reports in their house, come into school, transfer that into the school system because the school system doesn't talk to their own one. Reports go home that are immediately out of date and then all parents read. And what if you invest that time in a more collaborative endeavour with children and young people, that home school communication becomes much more dynamic, much more live, much richer than there has been. So that's an example in our primaries. Lots of our secondary schools looking at skills framework, either a skills framework that they have taken from the plethora of skills frameworks that are available to us, or working with the learning community, working with local employers, local college partners to develop a skills framework that's then used as a basis for designing learning. And how you then use a profile to help a young person make sense of their growth and development in those skills, which are aligned to our 4 capacities. What else? Project-based learning is the space our secondaries are really getting into, both in the early years of secondary and in our senior phase. As qualification opportunities. Helena from Daydream Believers is here and is offering one of the breakout sessions later on that. I couldn't recommend that enough to you if you want to see a really innovative example of project-based learning that's meaningful and authentic and makes those skills explicit for children and young people. Our college partners are exploring this with us, and college is really interesting because they are both a receiver, an user, an end user of a learner profile, and they're saying we think a profile like the one that we're looking at nationally in Scotland could enhance very much the information that we get about a learner. We could better support candidates, we could better course people, but also we can add to that. We will be a place where youngsters extend their achievement, extend their growth and their skills development, and have more to say that for the destination they go on to next. And what else have I got on my notes? So a small test of change going there. We've got a college partner actively testing with us this year. What does that what does that application process look like if we use a profile instead of a traditional application form? Micro-credentialing, or digital badges, is something that came through really, really strongly, both from the young people who live in a world of streaks and stickers and all that kind of stuff, but also from employers who said more and more we're looking at digital badging or micro-credentialing around a specific skill set that's useful to us, around a specific capacity or aptitude, and we want that to be able to transfer, and you can see that on LinkedIn, so that's something we're actively trying to build into this. We have done, and I think in the last panel, people spoke about having an assessment of the assessment. We've just done that in Scotland. We have some really new, exciting proposals for a more inclusive approach to assessment at the end of school. You're filming this, and I'm a civil servant, so I won't say any more than that, but it is really exciting, and that it is sitting with our Minister and Government at the moment to make this happen. Our group sees the work of the kind of profiling group as being really, really important as an enabler. If we are going to move toward a more inclusive, more holistic approach to assessment at the end of secondary school, we need this work to be well developed, to be strengthened, to be happening across our system before we take it forward. I think that's probably okay just now, Rosie.
That's great, so thank you, Graeme. I don't know, Michael, are you wanting to jump in, or you're sort of, no?
I can see that I'm sitting forward. That wasn't my intention.
I thought you might wanted to respond to Graeme there.
I was just going to make sort of one overall comment. We talk at the OECD, it's quite a grand phrase, about the political economy of education. And what it means is that nobody ever won an election on education, but lots of people lost one. It's really, really difficult to manage system shift, to use that phrase, in education. And all of the tiers of the system, from the political right the way down through policy making to the front line, have reasons for conservatism, many of them sourced in the natural conservatism of parents who went through the experience 10, 20 years ago. So it looks to us at the OECD and to other organisations in this game as though there needs to be a global movement to get this shift, which would mean the policymakers working as one, with the international organisation holding the umbrella over national governments, so there's an excuse to change if you get into trouble. And then a major effort at capacity building at policymaker level. My colleagues don't need it, but what does it take to go from hierarchical legislation and regulation to enabling from the grassroots the shift we need, and then communications to governments, including in the global south. This movement will be built as much by Brazil and Indonesia and India as the powerhouses of the north. Above all to the profession, but also with public audiences. So I think it's as big as that to get the kind of change that we're talking about around the world, because it's so easy to stall it politically.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And a quick follow-up before we sort of open up to questions I had was thinking about the sort of mechanics of change, because you've all outlined sort of really ambitious and inspiring visions for sort of the future of assessment in your respective areas. But I was wondering, I'm curious about the one challenge that you really feel at a systemic level in bringing about the kind of change you want to see and ensuring there's rigour, validity and trust in new systems that are being generated. And I wonder, Cassy, maybe I'll come to you first and then Fabrizia and Graeme.
Certainly it's something that's very, very topical for us. One of the things we've done over recent years is kind of conceptualise sort of 4 principles around design and qualifications, which tries to put the focus more on manageability. So we have a model we call MERV, manageability, which is about how the qualifications can be delivered, engagement for learners, they need to be engaging, and then we've got reliability and validity, which people have been talking about for many years, and I've tended sometimes to focus exclusively on. the manageability is absolutely key. We've been on a journey with reform, looking at vocational qualifications post-16, for example. And I think we've initially made the mistake that once we've kind of sold it to one person in a college, then we've sold it to that college. They understand what they're doing, but we haven't. Every single teacher or person that's delivering something new has got to make a shift of change, and that's painful, particularly when you're working flat out, when you've got so many pressures upon you, when society is shifting as it is and has done post-pandemic. So for us, whereas historically we might have been entirely focused on the qualification design, now perhaps what even greater concern is actually how we work with the education system to involve them in the change, to support them through that change, and to really gain a wide understanding of the benefits of that change. And I think we can never underestimate the challenge that brings.
Absolutely. And Fabi, I wonder if you might comment on this from an IB perspective, working in 180 countries. That's
I think it's a specific challenge. So I guess what we don't have is the need to respond to individual governments' requirements, visions, but then we also have to respond to every government's requirements, visions in order to grow and in order to be purposeful. I think from the greatest challenge from an IB perspective is that and again it goes back to assess the assessment, we have to have a careful design to make sure that our approach to reform, to what's changing, is inclusive of different realities. We can't make assumptions about the availability of technology, that something can be taught in one country with freedom. Reflection is a skill that's really important. It's really important for us to be nurturing reflection, but that requires openness and honesty on the part of the learner, and to put themselves in a vulnerable position to say, I did well here, I didn't do so well here. And in some cultures, both of those things are non-norms. They cannot be spoken about. So we have a really unique challenge, but we take the best of the best from every individual situation that we're looking at. So for example, we might benchmark certain areas of development against one country's approach because we believe that to be the best, and then we challenge globally everybody to reach that same standard. So it has its own difficulties, but also its own unique opportunities.
Right, thanks Fabi, and 1 minute, second Graeme, on your main challenge.
When I think about challenges and change, I think about a teacher, we call her Alice. 2 days before schools closed, Easter 2020, and that scary time, and seeing Alice at the photocopier, paper flying everywhere, steam coming out of the photocopier, steam coming out of Alice, and her saying to me, I just want to give the kids everything I can, because I'm no use with this technology, Graeme, because despite my best efforts, Alice had never opened the iPad I'd given her. She had not taken part in any of the professional learning we'd done. Alice was a phenomenal teacher, but really scared of technology. 3 weeks later, Alice was teaching live lessons on Teams. She was giving feedback verbally through voice notes. She was setting assignments and assessing digitally. And I think there's a bit for me around how much we can change when we have to. But for Alice, who was a really good teacher, that was the first time she really saw the purpose of digital learning, when the kids could not come to her phenomenal classroom and were sent home, and she had to have another way that then made the investment of her time and her change worthwhile. And as part of that challenge around us being able to have more events like this to convince, and as Michael was kind of taking us into the space of around the educational purpose, how this makes things better for children and young people, showing people that it can be done, and thinking about the kind of range of evidence that we've already heard about this morning of examples from initial teacher education, examples of project-based learning, examples of schools working in partnership with lots of different organisations to strengthen and take a more holistic approach to curriculum and assessment. Are they the bits that we kind of are probably aligned on in this room, and that we can work together to strengthen?
Great, thank you Graeme. Brilliant. We have maybe 5 minutes for questions. If anybody would like to pose any questions to the panel, we've got a gentleman over there, maybe to start with.
Yes, thank you. It's a question for Cassy. I'm always impressed by what Wales have done with their personalised assessments up to years 9, which is basically assessment that's delivered online and adaptive to every school in Wales. So every child has a device that they can use. I'm just curious in terms of, as a regulator, and seeing Wales, almost shape the future in assessment by doing something like that over the past 5 years, 600,000 kids every year. Do you feel that other regulators aren't as forward-thinking or shaping the future of assessment, where they may see assessment as something that should be boring, it should be done on paper, and it should be under some sort of guardianship? Do you think Wales have got a head start in that respect?
I think it wouldn't be for me to comment on it. I can only say that I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in terms of looking at the range of assessment forms. We have a really thoughtful and imaginative and researching and inquiring modernising assessment team, and we are always looking to innovate. Is one of our values as an organisation, and I think we're in a different place. We have different legislative powers, so it is our job to shape the range of qualifications that are available, whereas other regulators might have the remit to look at standards more as a focus. So there are different roles and different players in that system. But I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's over there. Sorry. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So there was a rather annoying article by William Hague recently in one of the papers where he uses the PISA scores, the relative PISA scores of the home nations, to make the case that England's very traditionalist approach is bearing fruit, and that Wales and Scotland are going down the wrong alley, which I don't believe. But I think those of us who are interested in reform need to be cutting riposte to that kind of politicisation of PISA scores. So I'm hoping you can give us some of those. I know there's some issues around sample size and about the sort of average intelligence of the kids in the English sample, for example. But what are our best arguments against that politicisation of PISA scores in the home nations?
I think it goes back to the do you value what you measure, or do you measure what you value? And I think that until the wide breadth of what learners know, understand and can do, and it is reflected in the way that they are assessed, then different nations will perform differently. I think what we want to give learners in Wales is, and as it sounds in Scotland too, is that sort of profile of different achievements. Qualifications are used for many purposes, and some of those purposes can divert their design from meeting the needs of the learner to meeting other needs, economic, political, measurement of education and so forth. But at the heart of them, qualifications should be about identifying achievements that learners can reach and then recognising those achievements.
Thanks, Cassy. Michael, I wonder if you might comment also, given the evolution of PISA, which you alluded to at the beginning.
Yeah, obviously the top jurisdiction in PISA is Singapore, by a country mile. But they don't talk about how thrilled they are that their children are above OECD average in the Kant phrase in maths, science and reading. They talk about the extraordinary challenges that face Singapore, East Asia, the world over the next 20 or 30 years, and their conviction that their children need to develop in different ways as ethical reasoners, as adaptive problem solvers, what have you. What I don't think would be right would be to decouple education from the political world, though many people think we should. I just think that the political world is beginning to recognise very different challenges of wealth gaps, social fragmentation, immigration, of course, depletion of resources, collapse of morale at every level. And I think that if we could craft a PISA or education systems that address those problems, no one could argue that that is an improper use of an education system. You'd still want every individual child to flourish within that framework, but I think the apologists for education who say keep it totally divorced from a struggling world are barking up the wrong tree.
Thanks, Michael. Maybe one more question. Are you down here? Is that right, Ollie?
This is all incredibly inspiring. It's really, really wonderful to see what the future might look like for our children. And I was incredibly inspired similarly a chunk of years ago by technical awards and things like that. However, as a teacher at the coalface, I could not then put those into practice because they didn't meet Progress 8 in our mainstream school. So then I was completely had my doors closed to helping all these children that I thought I was going to be able to really help out in new and wonderful ways, because we couldn't then meet as a school an external assessment mark if we didn't have all of our children in the Progress 8 brackets. Similarly, I'm sorry, for International Baccalaureate as well. We had all of our students who may have wanted to do technologies, the arts, but were shuffled into an e-baccalaureate kind of space where they couldn't necessarily include themselves in the creatives. How do we get around that as an issue? And I don't want to say the horrible swear word that is Ofsted, but they, you know, their assessment levels for schools is where Progress 8 probably comes from, and them wanting to give us a little bit of a league table. That how do we get around that as an issue?
And I guess that speaks to the accountability framework within a particular sort of jurisdiction in England, obviously constrained by what you've just mentioned. I wonder, Graeme, if you might want to talk a bit about the sort of accountability architecture in Scotland, very briefly, that enables the sorts of transformations that you're leading.
We don't have quite the specific issue that you've talked about, but we do have similar things around the accountability for schools and the way schools are judged, still ultimately affecting the decisions that are made. Some recent research that was done recently, I hope I could say hand on my heart as a school leader and lots of work as a teacher. I've never said to a child, you should do this subject, not that one, because it will affect graphs, but we have kind of research about that. We have made some progress. We did move away from quite a rigid kind of performativity system. We now use a benchmarking tool that does take a broader look. So when Cassy was talking about the kind of development of qualifications in Wales, I was in my head thinking about we have seen a real increase in the last 3 years in national progression awards, which are qualifications that are broadly similar to our national fives and highers, so GCSE and A-level, but are more aligned vocationally to the workplace, aren't assessed by an exam, but are assessed through a range of ongoing assessment. These are really, really attractive to schools because they allow schools the opportunity to align curriculum with future pathways, so and offer a broad range of richer, meaningful experiences for youngsters. These are now accredited as part of that framework. That benchmarking tool is evolving slowly to take account of that and to take a broader kind of range of measures. So that is that's helping us. Another thing that's helping us is our 4 capacities that I talked about, and we've had conversations with the OECD, with other jurisdictions internationally, who've also set out high-level overarching competencies or capacities to say, well, if that's really what we say school is for, and we are agreed to that because we've just checked them all and everybody has agreed, we need to have other ways of understanding that, and what are the kind of perhaps more long-term measures that we might look at. The conversation around sampling rather than everybody kind of doing the same thing is coming back to Scotland again. And the other thing we're seeing is schools developing their own benchmarks around different things. So if we say that, we can think of one secondary school that is now saying, yes, we're making progress on the attainment, and our new benchmarking tool is helping with that. But also we can talk about attendance, we can talk about staff turnover, we can talk about the engagement that we see in using kind of some, I suppose, harder tools to get some harder data out of that allows people to tell a story. So that's not a full answer, but different things are happening in that kind of space.
Thank you, Graeme. Points to a future of, what could accountability look like. Right, we've run over loads. I'm going to be in trouble with Ollie, but thank you so much for such a brilliant conversation, and hopefully we continue this over lunch, and please do get involved in Rethinking Assessment and help us keep the connections going. So yeah, thank you very much to the panelists.